So this video is going to be looking at the sources that talk about the immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination. So we're sort of talking literally the first couple of months after he was killed. So you can see there is a number of Cicero letters. They're all quite short ones, you'll be pleased to know. A section from one of Cicero's speeches, and also 2 different coins. So one of the first things you should be aware of before we even look at sources is that Rome was very confused, I guess, after Caesar's assassination. So there were 2 main factions. There was obviously those who supported Caesar, known as Caesarians, and there were those who believed that the assassination of Caesar would lead to, the Republic being restored, etc. And Rome was quite literally kind of almost like split in half over this. A lot of the plebs were really unhappy that Caesar had been assassinated, and they flocked to his sort of second in command, who was Mark Antony, and were demanding obviously things to he can't bring Caesar back, but in other words, like to punish those who had killed him. Most of the Senate had flocked behind obviously those who had committed the assassination. Now, 2 key people who were involved in the assassination were Brutus and Cassius. It gets very complicated, this particular part of the course. Now, although Cicero wasn't involved in the assassination, he did throw his support behind Brutus and Cassius, and he really, really, really dislikes Mark Antony for varying reasons, as we'll have a look through. Now, after Caesar was assassinated, like I said, the state wasn't quite sure what to do. And there was basically like a bit of a lost opportunity for those who had assassinated him. So what Mark Antony does is he manages to get hold of Caesar's toga, which was covered in blood because he'd been stabbed several times, and gave a sort of public speech and a public funeral for Caesar. And he got literally kind of held up this bloodied toga. And the people were outraged at what had happened to Caesar. Then one of the conspirators, I think it's Brutus off the top of my head, but I might be wrong on that, sorry, I just didn't mean to scroll down, also tried to give a speech, but his speech was really useless and he didn't win the public support. So as I said, we had these 2 big factions vying for control. So this kind of puts into context of these 3 letters that all occur straight after the assassination of Caesar. So just in terms of dating, it's the same year, and this is sort of just under a month after the assassination. You get a bit of a feel about what is going on in Rome at this particular point. So Cicero had a meeting with someone, it doesn't say who, which is a bit frustrating, and this person had said to Cicero that Rome was finished, and as typical kind of Cicero, he tends to agree with this. Not because he doesn't agree with the assassination of Caesar, but because you've got Mark Antony starting to I'm trying to think of the right way of phrasing this, position himself as the sort of the I can't speak, Julius Caesar second, as it were. Sorry. Now, while when Mark Antony sort of came to the forefront, that's the word I was looking for earlier, he started passing very different legislative laws, whatever, that he claimed that Caesar had put forward either in his will or before he died. So Cicero's going to mention a few of these that he doesn't necessarily think are probably true. So fine. We have Lepidus, who will become important later, but, well, not important, but he's around. So we'll talk about him a little bit later on in another video. Then we just kind of scroll down. We have some sort of issues around this gentleman called Sextus. So Sextus is Sextus Pompeius, so I'm going to add in his surname. And he is one of Pompey's sons. Shockingly, he's the 6th son, hence the name Sextus. He had a 5th son called Quintus. Not very original names. So he's one of the sons of Pompey, and he was sort of positioning himself as possibly a defender of the Republic. And there's rumours of this kind of going on, and Cicero's hearing these rumours and he's like, oh, I'm not really sure whether or not I can really believe what's going on. But obviously he's particularly concerned about what's happening with Brutus. And then he mentions the fact that Brutus had given this speech, but actually he doesn't really come to anything. And that's kind of it for that letter. It's not particularly an interesting letter, but it's a nice short letter, so fine. So he's like, I don't want to get involved, but he's clearly throwing his weight behind Brutus. We then have another letter a couple of weeks later, and he's a little bit more specific about some of the problems going on. So I fear the Ides of March have brought us nothing but except joy and satisfaction for our hatred and grief. So he's really pleased, basically, that Caesar's assassination, which is on the Ides of March, was a good thing. However, he makes a pretty crass statement. I'm just going to tidy up my highlighting. Sorry, it's really annoying me. There we go. Which was, "'Twas a fine deed, but half done." Now, this is making a reference to the fact that Mark Antony was not assassinated, and Cicero and a few others kind of believe that they both should have been killed that day, particularly as now Mark Antony is kind of positioning himself as I said, the successor to Caesar. And as I said, Cicero doesn't like Mark Antony in the slightest. Okay, so then we start talking about some bills that Mark Antony says that Caesar has put forward. So one is about Sicily, and said that he claimed, that Caesar had put forward that the Sicilians were to become Roman citizens. Okay, so Cicero thinks that Mark Antony's doing this because he'd been bribed to do so by somebody, don't know who, and the fact that this Sicilian citizenship thing had never been mentioned while Caesar was alive. So he believes Mark Antony's being bribed to put forward some laws in Caesar's name which weren't actually accurate. Okay, there's also this issue with this guy called Diotarus, got there actually, which is mentioned further down here, so I'll leave that for now. What we do have is this interesting character who's now appearing, this young man called Octavius. So Octavian is known by a few different names. At this point, you just need to worry about him being called Octavius. Now, Octavius was Julius Caesar's great-nephew. So they are related, but they're not directly related. So Octavius was about 18, from memory, when this happened. So Octavius goes to visit Cicero, and he's being really nice. And Cicero says that his followers call him Caesar because he was, the great-nephew of Caesar. And Cicero is a little bit concerned about this guy turning up. Judgment, he cannot be a good citizen because there are too many around him. So he's worried that this young man, this boy, is being used by Caesar's supporters for their own ends. And his supporters also threatened death to our friends, i.e. Cassius and Brutus, and called the present state of things intolerable. So why has Octavius turned up? Well, Octavius has turned up because he was named as Caesar's heir in his will, which was very unexpected because he's just a great nephew. No one had heard of this young man until he was named. Mark Antony assumed he was going to inherit Caesar's estate, etc., but it didn't. It was actually this young man called Octavius. Now, Octavius knew that the only way he would basically survive was to come into Rome to claim his inheritance. So that's why he has turned up. And he appears to have gone to Cicero, in order to maybe gain some support for his particular cause. He also wants, so I was just thinking for a second, he also wants Brutus and Cassius to be punished. Because obviously in Caesar's will, he has been named as heir, which means he's also been adopted as Caesar's son. This is very typical of kind of Roman wills. So he's going around saying, well, these men have killed my father. Obviously not his actual father, but like his adopted father. So he wants some kind of justice. And Octavius is unhappy about things that are going on at the time. Do notice that he does call him like the boy quite a lot. This is not the last time we're going to hear of this young man called Octavius, but for now we're going to leave him to one side. So you can see there's like these different camps. You've got Mark Antony, you've got Cicero who's trying to support Brutus and Cassius, and the Senate, etc. And we also have this third person, Octavius, appearing wanting Brutus and Cassius to be punished for the assassination of Caesar. This is something also that Mark Antony is supportive of because he was, his best mate or whatever. Okay. So then we have our third and final letter. Still same year, again, a couple months later. So Cicero's not in Rome, he's in a place called Antium, and he's gone to visit Brutus, because I said he was supporting Brutus. And Brutus asks Cicero for some advice. So Cicero gives him some advice, which is to accept this Asiatic Corn Commission. So in order to calm the situation, I guess, is a way of putting it, and not to be seen to reward the killers of Caesar, but also not punish them, Mark Antony and the Senate reached an agreement, and the key conspirators were basically given different provinces to kind of get them out of Rome, out of the situation. Now, so Brutus gets, this Corn Commission, and Cassius has to go off somewhere. I think he gets Sicily, maybe, or another province. I can't remember off the top of my head. We'll watch a video on it in lesson anyway. Now, Brutus was really unhappy about this Corn Commission because this was seen as a little bit of a slap in the face. It's quite not a lowly position, but it's not what he would possibly expected after restoring the Republic. So he's quite unhappy, and that's why he's asking for Cicero's advice. So Cicero's advice said, his safety was all that concerned us because he was worried what Mark Antony would do next. Cassius then appears and he repeats himself. And then Cassius is unhappy about the situation, like I said, about also with Brutus, and he has no intention of going to Sicily. Why should I have taken as an insult, though it had been a favour? So then he relates this conversation. So what do you mean to do then? He says, he replied he would go to Greece, so that's where Cassius is going to go. What about you, Brutus? Said I. To Rome, he answered, if you agree. Cicero, but I don't agree because he won't be safe, because he's aware that, Mark Antony's out for his blood, also Octavius is out for his blood as well. So they're having this discussion. He says a great deal of talk followed, which they complained, Cassius especially, about the opportunities that had been let slip, and Decimus came for severe criticism. So this is another co-conspirator. It's very busy. Now Cicero kind of tries to calm it all down, says, yeah, I know, I appreciate it, but there's not much you can do about it now, so stop being upset about it. And he sort of starts to give you about what should have done, but what he doesn't say is this next bit is not, however, touching on the point. So this is basically the criticism he has of the conspirators, that they should have summoned the Senate, urged popular enthusiasm to action with greater vigour, assumed leadership of the whole Commonwealth. So basically he said they should have done a lot more, but he keeps this to himself because obviously he doesn't want to insult them, and plus he knows people will react really badly to it. But that is clearly what Cicero thinks should have happened. Like I said, he doesn't say this bit out loud, but this is what he is absolutely thinking. Okay. So basically nothing really comes out of this particular visit, but they did feel that they should visit Cicero first before they do anything because of this obligation of affection and duty. So it's quite a nice little evidence about there's some kind of alliance between Cassius and Brutus and Cicero and his faction. Fine. Nothing particularly interesting in the rest of the letter. So then what Cicero does is he gives a series of different speeches. So we have an extract from the second of these speeches called the Second Philippic. So these speeches were very specifically targeting Mark Antony. In fact, they're just about Mark Antony and basically what a horrible person he is. So this is what this speech is going to talk about, and it's going to be building on some of the issues that Cicero had mentioned in his letters, particularly about the legislation. But he's going to attack Mark Antony in general terms. So, hang on. So there's this idea. I was just moving you can't see what was moving, but I had the light on my screen that was really annoying me. So let us return to the auspices about which Caesar was about to speak in the Senate on the Ides of March. So this is about him seeing like good omens about what he's going to do next. Tell me, what would you have said? I heard indeed that he'd come down prepared because he thought that I intended to speak about the fabricated auspices. So he's saying that, these two basically have a bit of a history. They don't really get on. That, Mark Antony was going to attack Cicero, and Cicero was like, well, I wasn't going to do anything. So anyway, the fortunate Roman people eliminated the business of that day, i.e. Caesar was killed. Did the assassination of Caesar also put an end to your opinion respecting the auspices? However, I have now reached a point where more important matters arise than those I've begun to discuss. So it's good to know, Cicero, because your first bit doesn't really make much sense. What an escape of that it was. What an alarm you had on that memorable day because he thought he was going to be killed. What little confidence you had that your life would be spared. So conscious were you of your wickedness. So he's going to give the reasons for his wickedness in a bit. I told those liberators of ours in the capital, i.e. Brutus and Cassius, when they wanted me to go to you to urge you to defend the Republic, that as long as you were afraid you would promise everything, but that as soon as you stopped being afraid you would be yourself again. So although Mark Antony would appear conciliatory and yes, I want to restore the Republic, that's only because he was trying to save his life, because Caesar has been assassinated, But as soon as, he felt secure that he would just disregard everything he had said and therefore just return to his usual wicked self, which is fine. He goes through some events of the day which you don't need to particularly worry about. We're getting on to the better section. So I put the definition of that word in there because I didn't know what it meant either. So all that fine panegyric. So that is a public speech which praises someone. In other words, he gave this speech about Caesar after he had died. Yes, it was you who have hurled those firebrands with both of those which Caesar was nearly burned, and by which the house of this guy here was set on fire and destroyed. So there was kind of like some mob violence that occurred after Caesar's funeral, because everybody was really upset about that Caesar had been assassinated. It was you who launched those attacks on our houses. So he's accusing Mark Antony of being behind the violence that occurred afterwards, and he was deliberately attacking people like Cicero and also his supporters. So, and then they repelled them by using the violence back. So it was mob mentality basically after Caesar's funeral. Okay, fine. By this action, it appeared to show that you had conceived such a hatred of kingly power that you took away for the future on account of the name of the last dictator. So I skipped a massive chunk of the source, which doesn't make any sense. So you remember yourself what you said about the exiles, it's with the exemption, but the best thing of all was that you removed the title dictator from the constitution. So Mark Antony then passes a law that stops the dictatorship from being available again. So he does this to show that he hated kingly power, not necessarily because he actually believed in it. There we go. That makes way more sense now. So to other men, the republic now seemed re-established, but it did not appear so to me at all. He could see through the ruse, basically, is what Cicero was saying. As I was afraid, as long as you were at the helm. So as long as he was still kind of in control of things, being consul or whatever, then everything was all a lie, and that's clearly Mark Antony was going to try and take power himself. Citizenship was now being given not only to single persons only, but to entire provinces. So this is when we talked about the Sicilians, and there's another region as well, but it should sort of been given in Caesar's name, and suppose it was in Caesar's will. So this is an attack on that. He's saying, the actual empire of the Roman was reduced by a market to this man held in his own house. In other words, Antony's been bribed to do this, not because Caesar had actually told him to do so. So I thought someone was knocking on my door. Where are the 700 million sesterces which appear on the accounts of the Temple of Ups? So he's now accusing him of just corruption, of taking money that was not him. And how was it that when you owed 40 million sesterces, a lot of money, on the Ides of March, which is the day that Caesar was assassinated, you would cease to owe them by the 1st of April. What a coincidence. Suddenly you owed money, now you don't owe money. What's happening? So again, this kind of corruption and bribery that he is being accused of by Cicero. Whoever was a more bitter enemy to another Caesar than was to this. I told you he'd be back. Well, he's back. So I'm just trying to read. So he's a king of somewhere. I don't know where. Basically, was being targeted by Caesar. And Caesar says, could ever obtain any justice or favour while Caesar was alive, yet became quite an influential man with him when he was dead. So again, it's the idea that Caesar has supposedly put some laws in place that affected this man, but there is no evidence of this. So while he was alive, Caesar deprived him of all of these things. Now he's dead, he gives them back. So it's that kind of question about Mark Antony's doing all these things in Caesar's name, but Cicero saying, but Caesar did the opposite of this when he was alive, so why would he suddenly change his mind in his will or in his last papers? This doesn't make sense. Mark Antony is just doing things to make himself popular in Caesar's name, but in reality. So he talks again about a little bit of some more money going missing. So a bond for 10 million sesterces was entered, and I advise you to consider carefully what you intend to do with regards to this bond. So there's money available, and he's like, so what are you going to do with this money that's been bonded to you? Is it going to disappear like the other money has disappeared? Who knows? And that's going on about the bond, so I'm going to skip over that because it's not a particularly interesting section of the source. Why do I speak of the innumerable handwritten notes, the countless memorandia, so like memos, which have been brought forward? There are imitators who sell forgeries of these openly, as if they were handbills of gladiatorial shows. There are now such heaps of money piled up in Antony's house. So he's basically saying, yes, okay, there are these pieces of paper you claim to be from Caesar, But we all know people sell forgeries. So he's basically just accusing Mark Antony of complete and utter corruption, and that he is just using Caesar's name for his own ends. And that he also has loads of money in his house that he's using to do this bribery. Lately, to documents are posted by which the wealthiest cities in Crete are exempt from paying tax. Where's that come out of? You're saying that's in Caesar's name, but that doesn't make any sense. Are you in your right mind? Are you just mad? Was it possible for there really to be a decree of Caesar's exempting Crete after the departure of Marcus Brutus, when Brutus had no connection whatsoever with Crete while Caesar was alive? So again, it's that question of, why would Caesar do this when Caesar wouldn't have done this when he was alive? So why is he doing it in his will? None of this makes sense. And then the speech continues. You can please know that's the only bit of the Philippic that we have to read. I hate that source. Okay. We also then have 2 coins published around the same time. So this is just after Caesar's assassination. So we'll start with the denarius of Antony, because it ties in with Cicero's speech. So you've got Antony on one side, and we have Julius Caesar on the other side. You'll notice here it says Caesar D.I. something. That basically means he's been deified. He's become a god on death. So he was decreed, that's probably a better way of phrasing it, and became godly. So the fact he's putting himself on the same coin as Caesar is showing that link he has to Caesar. So he's kind of, again, promoting himself through Caesar and Caesar's works. And it kind of ties in what Cicero's claiming about Mark Antony. I mean, maybe those pieces of paper were real. We don't know. But it does seem a little bit suspicious. Like I said, especially as he is definitely having this self-promotion. Probably one of the most famous coins of the late Roman Republic is this particular coin here, which is produced by Brutus. So you have Brutus on one side. Not particularly interesting. This is you may have seen this side of a coin before. So it says Id Mar, so that's the Ides of March. You see there's 2 daggers, and then there is this weird little cap thing. So the cap is a cap of liberty. It's a slave's cap. And the 2 daggers are, daggers, funnily enough. So basically what this coin is saying, that on the Ides of March, when Caesar was assassinated, the Roman people were freed from slavery because he was assassinated. So it's a really clever propaganda tool in order to try and gain support for their actions in the assassination of Caesar. This is an image we'll come back to during the emperors, actually. It's a coin very similar to this, gets published later. So this gives you a bit of an insight into, as I said, the chaos of Rome at this particular point. It's very factional. You've got Mark Antony positioning himself. You've got Cicero trying to help the conspirators. You've also got the young man Octavius appearing for the first time, which we will talk about his then continual rise to secure his own position in the next video.